our website. Um, don't know how to get rid of that. Do you guys see that box in the middle? I see it in my screen. Is it showing up there too, Jim?
Yes. Just says this meeting's being recorded.
Okay.
You could just click on got it. I think it'll go away.
Oh, everyone should click on got it.
If I could find my cursor, I would do that.
Okay, mine went off. Thanks.
As soon as I do this, I lose my cursor.
Oh, bummer.
Yep, and I don't know how to stop the share. There we go. We'll try this again. Okay, March 13th, 2024. I did put in a photograph from Jim's book here of President Teddy Roosevelt speaking at one of his outings. And I want to thank you, Jim, for agreeing to do this talk tonight for us. I want to invite those of you who are not members of the Grand Canyon Historical Society. Our dues are only $35 a year, and we are an all-volunteer organization, and our mission is to preserve and promote the history of the Grand Canyon and the region. So please join us if you like what you see tonight. If you become a member, you will get the Old Pioneer, our quarterly publication 4 times a year, which includes the bulletin, which is updated news for the Historical Society. We do these virtual outings. We have the occasional tour at the South Rim and North Rim of the Grand Canyon. And you can find all of the information about our organization at grandcanyonhistory.org. And we invite you to peruse our website. We also conduct the occasional oral history. And if you know of somebody who would like to participate, you can also write to us at that same address. This is actually one of our board members, Tom Sulpizio, interviewing somebody in his hometown of Santa Barbara. So if you have an idea for a presentation, please contact us at outings@grandcanyonhistory.org. Our next virtual outing will be Tuesday, April 9th, and Eric Berg, who's a former GCH board member and a avocational historian, will present an experiment in education, the early history of the Yavapai Observation Station. And you can see from the photograph that Eric has dug up here that the Yavapai Observation Station, sometimes called the Geology Museum today, was an open-air museum to begin. So we're very pleased tonight to welcome Jim Blase to our program. He has written a book called From Sea to Shining Sea. This is actually a series of books that are available on Amazon. And Jim has very graciously allowed everybody attending tonight to obtain a digital copy of his book, which includes many of the speeches that President Roosevelt gave on his 1903 tour across the United States. And he's going to share that story with us tonight. And so at that point, I'm going to stop my share. And Jim, thank you very much, and we welcome you.
Oh, thank you very much. First, I want to apologize. I think the hosts understand that what happened was on January 5th. What was Teddy Roosevelt's date of death? 5th or the 6th? One of those two. On January 5th, my longtime 15-and-a-half-year partner, I'm an estate planning attorney in St. Louis, and my 15-and-a-half-year partner abruptly resigned. Well, that was, in estate planning, we do a lot of tax work, and we don't do 1040s, but we do a lot of trust tax returns. So when people die, they might have to file a tax return. We have a lot of those, like well over 100, and he resigns right at the start of that. So all of a sudden now I have to take over all his jobs and as well as my drafting work. So I told these guys it's not going to be, this presentation is going to be substantively right from my heart. It's going to be what I tell people every day, but I don't have this polished PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. But I actually think it's more enjoyable, to be honest with, just to talk about it and what my experiences were, why I wrote this book, what the Grand Canyon means to me. It means a lot to me. I've been to Grand Canyon 3 times over the last 4 years, and I went to the South Rim. I've been there in the past too, but recently I've been going there more often because I love it so much, and it's just so amazingly beautiful. And I went to the South Rim first, and that was in 2003. I'm sorry, I'm getting the years mixed up. Yeah, 2003. No, I'm sorry, 2019. You get the years right. Roosevelt went there in 1903. I wrote this first book in 2019 to honor the 100th anniversary of his passing. Most of my books, if you ever go to my website, Blase Law, BLASELAW.com, most of my books you'll see have to do with centennials. I don't know why, I'm just kind of obsessed with centennials. I wrote, I made a 4-hour video on the 1904 World's Fair. I wrote a book about it, and I've written other books you'll see in there, all about centennials. And I think what interests me about it is, basically no one alive today was there. And so I like to bring the stories to life, and I really like to bring them to life in the first person. And so what happened was, why did I write this book? Well, when I was out west, I go to all the national parks all the time. One year I think it was 2018. I was out west, and I knew that, I think everyone knows that, Roosevelt, is the national parks guy, right? And everyone probably knows he went to Yellowstone, he went to Yosemite, he went to the Grand Canyon. But what I didn't know when I first started reading about this was, that was all on one trip. He went to those national parks all on the exact same trip in 1903. In fact, what he did in that trip was, he had already he was going to do this trip in 1902, and I'll talk a little more about this. And if people that know much about Roosevelt know, he almost died in 1902, in September of 1902, when a trolley car ran into his buggy, his carriage, and the driver, the guy who was sitting next to the driver, died. Roosevelt was thrown 20 feet and was seriously hurt, and he couldn't make the trip. So he decided, I'll make it in April of 1903. But he had already committed, right before he left on that trip, he had already committed to the president of 1904 World's Fair Society that he would dedicate the 1904 World. Back then it was going to be 1903. He was going to dedicate it on this certain date in April. So he, man of his words, what he did was, unfortunately I had to suspend my trip out west, but I'm still going to do my trip out west. But what I'm going to do, and he already had a certain time period, 2-week period, where he was going to go to Yellowstone. And that was in April of 1903. And so he takes a train all the way out to Yellowstone, visiting a zillion cities along the way. And then he travels back to St. Louis on the train, just to dedicate the World's Fair. Okay. And then heads back out west via the Grand Canyon, and he went to Yosemite. So that was his trip. It was an amazing trip. And I'm going to talk a lot about that, but that was 1903, and it was a 9-week long trip. And he went to, gave 282 speeches on that trip, 282 speeches, in addition to all the banquets and parades and planting trees and all that kind of stuff. He would never pass up an opportunity. Didn't matter when it was. If he was awake, he was going to go out in the back of the car and speak to the people. These trips that he made, the ones I'm talking about on my books, they weren't political trips. These were basically vacations. He was heading out for a camping trip or whatever. Okay. And he says, along the way, remember, this is like today, you don't just fly into Yellowstone. You had to take the train. So his view was, well, on the way, why don't I meet all the people? And that's kind of what he did. So all of these were basically 2-week vacations that he used the opportunity to visit all these cities. And it was kind of an amazing thing. So again, going back, does everyone know where this link is to the book? It's on my website, BlaseLaw, BLASELAW.com, and look under my biography. And when you see my biography, you'll find a link to it. I
also sent it out with the
email
announcement today.
Good. The email is a better version, because in order to make a link, you had to really reduce the size of it, and the pictures aren't very good. But I think the email version is pretty good. And then if you want the hard copy, you can buy that on Amazon. I think it costs $30. The book is 770 pages long. It's called From Sea to Shining Sea. He has over 250 photographs in it. So basically every city where he went, every day of the trip, I should say, of these trips, and they lasted. The total lasted like 5 months of these various train trips. I have photos from every single day, and you can actually see him aging over. So the book that we're talking about today, this one here called "This is my PowerPoint from Sea to Shining Sea." This covers, it's not everything I've written, but people kept asking me to consolidate it into one book, so I did. And this is just covers a 3-year period from 1902 to 1905. And over that period, though, he hit all 48 states and territories. Isn't that amazing? And then when you hit a state, again, it's not like today. When you hit a state like Arizona, he might have gone to 10 or 15 cities. Every stop along the way, he would, unless it was in the middle of the night, he would get out, give a speech, or he would actually get off the train or whatever. So that's what was interesting about it. So that's where you get the 282 speeches. That was just the one trip. Totally, it was more like 1,000 speeches. Again, these weren't his political ones. These were non-political years. It's not like today where every year's you're running for president. No, these were like, so 1903. That's not a political year. Today it would be, not back then. Okay, then 1905 was his next one, and then 1907. Okay, and then in 1902 he didn't even. That was not even the trips he made then were. It was an election year for Congress, but it wasn't an election year for president. So you get the idea. These were really vacations, and he wanted to meet the people along the way. So like I said, I've been to Grand Canyon 3 times in the last few years. And what I did each time was I went to a different spot. I went to the South Rim, and then the next year we went to the North Rim. I'd never been to the North Rim before, and I really wanted to go. So I went down from Zion to the North Rim. And then a year ago, I went to the Southeast. I call it the Southeast Rim, which I actually think was the prettiest of all of the trips I made. The eastern part, the southeast part, I thought was amazing. So really just loved it. I just love the Grand Canyon. It's just so spectacular. So that's why I am going to write a book, just so you know, about basically about this speech today, Teddy Roosevelt's entire role in this whole process. But it's going to be basically what I'm going to say today, kind of my views on these things. And one of my views is that, so I mentioned that in 1903, he went out to Yellowstone. He camped for 2 weeks, didn't shoot any animals or like that, actually camped for 2 weeks. That camping trip is not in this From Sea to Shining Sea book, but it's in this Keep It For Your Children, the 1903 book. It's all every day is chronicled. So, and then the way I wrote the books was I wrote them all in the first person. Okay, so this is Teddy Roosevelt talking to you. It is basically from 7 a.m. in the morning to midnight every day. Every hour of those days is accounted for. And believe me, that was real difficult. Okay, research on my part, but it's every hour of every day is for total of about 5.5 months is accounted for. Okay, so why did I write it in the first person? Well, I first got interested in Roosevelt in 1975. It was my freshman year of college, and I was in one of these courses where like an introduction to college, and we had to write a paper about the education of someone we admired. And I'm not even sure I remember why I picked Teddy Roosevelt, but I did. It's kind of funny. This was the first week of school, and the person sitting across from me was the person I eventually married. I was only 1 week into school, and she challenged me, and she picked Franklin Roosevelt, and who could do the better one. And so I kind of got into it, and I liked her. I always tease her about it. She sat across from me on this conference room table. And I always tease her that she was playing footsies with me the whole time. Anyway, we ended up getting married. We've been married for 41 years, and so she goes on with all these trips I go on. A lot of them. In May, I am recreating his 3 nights in Yosemite, and we're staying in the same places he did on the same nights he did. And in the same days? Why do I do it on the same days? Because I want to experience the weather. I mean, I know there's been global warming and stuff, but I want to experience the weather on those days. And I know I'm psycho, but for me, it's a lot of fun to do it because I've researched this so well, and I just live and breathe, Roosevelt. So what I noticed about the 1903 trip, so he goes to Yellowstone first, and then when he's done, he asked him to dedicate. It's called the Theodore Roosevelt Arch now, but it's the arch at the very northern boundary of Yellowstone, and they're building it. And they asked him to dedicate it, and he gives a speech. And about various things. But what I found very interesting about that was when they interviewed him, no reporters were allowed on these camping trips ever. So they interview him when he gets out, and he didn't. I mean, he liked Yellowstone, I guess, but he didn't gloat over it. In fact, one of the comments he made was that, about the geyser as well. Can I just, do that in my bath? Give some hot water and boil it and for my bath. I mean, kind of the way he saw it. He didn't see it as a spectacular park, at least in my opinion. But when he went to the Grand Canyon, and this is what's so important. Again, most of you guys already know this. I'm just repeating it from my perspective, what I noticed in my research. And if you know what happened then, so he gets at the South Rim, and all you guys already know this. You're at the South Rim, and you're on a beautiful day like it was today in St. Louis, sunny and 75. And you look at the Grand Canyon, and you can't leave. I mean, you just cannot take your eyes off it. You just don't want to leave. It's so gorgeous and just spectacular. Well, that's what happened. I think my view is that's what happened to Roosevelt when he got there. He was only there 10 hours. And my book is going to be about this 10 hours, the importance of it in the history of the national parks. But he was only there 10 hours. And when he was on the train, again, most of you guys already know this, but he was on the train. He was reading in the newspapers how the next day they were going to break ground on, all you guys already know all this stuff, what's called the El Tovar Hotel. And the El Tovar Hotel was going to be right on the rim of the Grand Canyon. And at that time, there were those photography studios and things like that. There was some mining, going on in the Grand Canyon, but it wasn't all developed. And Roosevelt sitting there, just think about this. He's sitting there. That's what I think about when I look out at the Grand Canyon. And I think like Roosevelt. I go, he was a really, really smart guy. And so he's thinking using common sense. And he goes, well, if they build that hotel, right on the rim of the Grand Canyon. And remember, the Grand Canyon was not a national park. You guys already know all this. It wasn't a national park, so it wasn't protected. Then what's going to happen? And it's going to be all these other hotels and houses, cottages, and the whole rim of the Grand Canyon, south and the north side. He's just picturing this is just going to be all these hotels and houses, and it's going to destroy it. Okay, and so the timing, that's what I'm talking about. He didn't hardly even knew what the Grand Canyon was when he went on this trip before he went there. And he sees it and sees this gorgeous thing. And he's going, oh my God, this unbelievable, huge, immense place is going to get destroyed. And so it wasn't a national park. And again, I'm telling you guys stuff you already know, but it wasn't a national park. So what could he do? So what he did that day, that's his famous "Keep It for Your Children, Leave It As It Is" speech, which is all outlined in the "Keep It for Your Children" book. He gives a speech about basically begging the people to leave it as it is. That's all he could do. He had no power. So that really did help, because the El Tovar Hotel ended up, I don't know if you guys have been there. It is moved back from the rim. And last time I was there, I paced it off. I think it was 60 feet or something, but I actually paced it off, and you can't really see it because it moved it back, and it's not really tall. By the way, too, when I was there last, I asked I was smart, and I asked the oldest person I could find working at the El Tovar Hotel, and I said, what room what did he stay in? What suite number? And she told me. The other people had no idea. And so I went up there, and it just so happened when I went up to that suite, they were cleaning the room, and the cleaning ladies let me in. They let me in, and I was in nirvana, walking around in the same room, that he stayed in. It wasn't that year, obviously. It was 1913 when he went back there on a camping trip. But to be able to walk in his room was awesome to me. So I really got into this, and I decided anyway to finish the story. So I wrote the paper about him in 1975, and I'm like all other college students. I was actually double majoring in 3 years in accounting and finance, and I was trying to graduate 3 years and go to law school. So a brutal schedule. So when I wrote my papers, like you guys, it's going to be kind of like this speech. It's going to be what I need to do to get it in. So what I did was my number one research book was his autobiography. And if anyone ever read it, it's an amazing read if you want to read it. So I basically based my whole paper on his autobiography, his unique education, which included a year or two in Europe when he was a child. So I wrote that paper. That really got me into him. And if most people know about Roosevelt, he wrote about 25 books himself, in addition to millions of articles and things. He would everything he'd go on, he'd write an article on it. If he had time, he would write an article on it. So he writes all these books. And what I noticed when I went to then I went to NYU, I went to Notre Dame for law school, then I went to NYU, and I started there in 1981. Well, right around then, 1979, 80, and 81, any of you guys that are Roosevelt experts know that that's when the two biggest biographies were written about him by Edmund Morris and David McCullough, Mornings on Horseback and The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. Those books were written then. And although they're great reads because it's Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, you can write anything. But what I noticed was, because I had done all this research, all they're really doing is repeating what he wrote. Okay. He wrote 25 books on all these different subjects, and they're just taking stuff from those books and putting them in here. And my view has always been, what would you rather read, what Teddy Roosevelt wrote or what someone thinks he wrote? You know, it's kind of like the Bible. You read about what someone said, Jesus said, or you just want to read the Bible, right? What did he really say? So that's kind of my view, is I wanted original. So when in 1981, I was going to school at NYU, and I just happened to live right by his boyhood home. That's where my apartment was. So I'd visit that a lot, and I would go out to Sagamore Hill, which is on Long Island. So I was really getting into Roosevelt, and I vowed right then that I am going to write a piece about Roosevelt, but only if it's an original work. If I'm just repeating, what everyone else, why waste your time? We're busy people. I'm not just going to repeat what he said and what other people said. So then all of a sudden, here's what happens. So now it's the year 2018. Okay, Roosevelt died at the beginning of 2019. Now I'm under the gun. Okay, because my 100-year thing, I'm under the gun, and now I was forced to come up with an idea, and that's where I got this idea that, again, most of you noticed about Roosevelt. He wrote journals of his trips to South America and Africa. He was there for a couple months each, and he wrote daily accounts of those. Well, why did he write those? That was interesting. Why did he write those? But he never wrote a journal about his 9-week trip on this 1903, which is just as long as the other trips. He never wrote anything about it. I've kind of already given you the answer, because when he was in South America and Africa, when he came home at night, there was nothing else to do. And so he would write these daily accounts, what happened today. When he was on these train trips, no, that never happened. He was always at a banquet or something like that. So no way did he have ever time to write. And then in the meantime, he's on these trips and he's writing these speeches. He actually wrote these, he dictated them to a secretary, but he wrote 282 speeches. That's basically all he did during the day. And he attended to work. He would get, he would get telegraphs and things like that. He was working too the whole time. So he had no time to do that. That's why. And also he was president at the time. When he wrote about South America and Africa, he was no longer president. One last thing. Another reason he wrote those things was that's what subsidized his trips. So magazines would basically pay for him to write these daily accounts of his trips. And that's what paid for his expeditions in South America and in Africa. So anyway, knowing all that stuff, I came up with this idea. Well, so he did, for various reasons, he did write journals of these train trips. Why don't I write it? And if I'm going to write it, I'm going to write it the way he would have written it. See, this is how I'm honoring the way he would have written it. And so I decided I'm going to write it in first person. And people ask, well, how are you able to write it in first person? Well, most of my research was based on newspaper accounts, and most of those newspaper accounts were from various AP reporters, sometimes local accounts. But just think about this. If you were on a train trip with someone for 9 weeks straight, every day for 9 weeks, I guarantee you'd get to know that person pretty well. So why is that relevant? It's what made that relevant to me was, so when the newspaper reporter would write something like, boy, he seemed to really enjoy that scenery. Okay. When he says that, you could pretty much be rest assured that he did enjoy it. So I would just change the words to, I really enjoyed that. See what I'm getting at? So when they described what he was wearing, I just changed it. I was wearing this. I planted this tree. I went to this banquet. I said this. That's how I did it. And so again, to finish that story, what I noticed about why the Grand Canyon is so significant, he didn't say a whole lot when he left Yosemite either, but he said a lot when he was leaving Grand Canyon, and he said a lot in that speech. And then everyone again in this organization knows what happened from there. So he decided, I got to protect this place. I got to figure something out. And this is where, when I made my train trip in 2019, I made this point, and a lot of people thought I was making a political point. It's not a political point, but the point is that what he did was the same thing that you see Joe Biden doing, and you see Donald Trump doing it. To me, it's amazing, it's permitted, but they do all these executive, whatever they can within their executive power, whatever, build a wall, take down the wall, all these things that they do. Well, Trump did the same thing because, again, all you guys already know this, in the Antiquities Act, okay, it gave the president the authority to basically declare anything a national monument. So he's a smart guy. So he goes to his attorneys and he says, well, is there anything in the law that keeps me from declaring the entire Grand Canyon a national monument, right? Again, you guys already noticed. And they said, no. And regardless, it will be held up years in court. So go ahead and do it. So his idea was, I'm going to declare it a national monument in order to protect it until I can get it made a national park. And again, you guys all know this. You may not all know exactly. When the Grand Canyon was made a national park, but you probably didn't know that was just a month after Roosevelt died. Okay. And up to that point, it was very, very difficult to get anywhere in Congress on that. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Okay. That Grand Canyon was made a national park a month after Roosevelt died. And so that's the whole story. And then I may give one more example, because most of you guys probably live in Arizona. So a few years ago, when I visited the southeast part of the Grand Canyon, we were staying in Sedona. And again, all you guys know what I mean by that. What's the difference between Sedona and the Grand Canyon? Well, we've just been talking about, right? The major difference is the train didn't go through Sedona in 1903. Okay. And what I mean by that is Roosevelt didn't even know Sedona existed, that area. And that's why, in my opinion, because if he did, I bet you wouldn't see. I mean, it's a beautiful place, but it's just filled with hotels and hot roads and restaurants. And, you just got to kind of weave through there to find the neat places. It's even difficult to park, right, when you find some place. And so Sedona to me is kind of like, you guys have probably been to Arches National Park. I think it's very similar to Arches, but Arches doesn't have all the hotels and restaurants and roads. So that's how I try to compare it. That's what my book's going to talk about. It's going to talk about how these two things develop. And Roosevelt would have seen that happening to Sedona. Again, Sedona is a great place. I love going there. But Roosevelt would have probably never let that happen, is what I'm trying to say. Because he thinks there's plenty enough places near Sedona that you can have your hotel. You don't have to be right by a monument. Okay. So that's my long-winded story about that. So I honestly feel that that 10-hour stop there, which was mostly focused on seeing all the sites he couldn't. He really regretted too that he wrote in his various speeches. He really regretted that he didn't know really what Grand Canyon was, but he really regretted he only allotted 9 or 10 hours to the Grand Canyon. So he goes back there. Okay, so after he was after this Africa trip and the South America trip, he decides, I'm going to basically reenact that trip I made in 1903. That's basically what he did. He made the same trip. The only difference was he spent more time at the Grand Canyon. That's also when he dedicated the Theodore Roosevelt Dam, and we actually visited that a few years ago too. So he loved it. Then he took his son back there in 1913 and did a much longer hunting trip, going down into the canyon all the way over to the North Rim. Okay, called it a hunting trip, but it was mostly scenery. So he obviously, of all the places, again, I've written about everything he's done. There's no question. You didn't see him go back to Yosemite. You didn't see him go back to Yellowstone. Okay. He loved the Grand Canyon and the beauty of it. And I just think Grand Canyon is amazing. So I've been to all these places many times. That's my number one. I do like Glacier Point at Yosemite. Yosemite is beautiful too, but it's a zoo. I don't think Grand Canyon is difficult to get around. Yosemite is really difficult to get around. All right. So I want to give you that little background. So that's how the series all started. And the various books, just so you know, they're all on that Amazon website. But the first one is Keep It for Your Children. That was the 1903 trip. That's my favorite book. Again, you can see it, but there's photos of every place he went, including the camping trips. That was not easy, but I actually I write about every day of the trip, what he did. And that's kind of a fun thing I'd like to do someday, but I don't think my wife would ever let me. I'd love to reenact a 2-week trip in Yellowstone and go to all the spots, but I don't think she'd let me do. Then the next book I wrote was this book called High Ideals, and this is the 1911 trip. So this is after he came back. That's his first grandchild right there. And one of the purposes of this trip was he ended up out in San Francisco because his daughter-in-law was pregnant with his first grandchild, and that's the grandchild right there. And so they stayed there for a week or so, and he gave a lot of speeches. It's called High Ideals because, remember, he's no longer president. So what he's talking about, if people know much about Roosevelt, was he was an incredibly moral man, and he would talk about how to live your life. All these books, he talks about how you live your life. He idolized mothers. It was the number one thing. It's like mothers were amazing to him. And he would just kind of trash fathers for mothers because the role that mothers played back then and still do today. But remember, there was no grocery stores. There was, there were no washing machines. You usually had like 10 kids. The husband would, after work, he'd go to the bars and then he'd come home, this type of thing. So he would idolize mothers and he idolized children. So when he would give these speeches, the children and the mothers would all be placed up front. You don't even see that today. You watch one of Donald Trump's, where are the kids? There aren't that many. So they would all sit up front. And the most honored people were the veterans. So the veterans were always on the stage with them. So, and I included veterans of the Civil War and Spanish-American War. They were on the stage with him. And you'll see these on these books. It's actually on the cover of the most recent book. Yeah, I don't want to go to right now, but they're on various covers of these books. So that's how he did it. And so he went to the first trip was 1902. Again, he was going to go out west. It got abated. He went to New England. That's where he almost died, in Massachusetts, when a streetcar hit his buggy and recovered and eventually went back out west. And so that's all written about. Then 1905. He hit the South, okay? So he hit, and that's all the way from Texas all the way to Florida. He hit all the states in the South. That book is called Reunion, and it's, by the way, all my books have the titles have a dual meaning. So Reunion has to do with, there were two parts of this trip. One was kind of Southwest and one was Southeast, and each one he went on a reunion. The Southwest was a reunion with the Rough Riders, and that was the purpose of the trip, okay? And then Southeast was a reunion with his family, so his mother's family, from Georgia. And so, but what you say, what's the dual meaning? Most of that discussion when he went into the South had to do with his efforts to reunite the country. Remember, this was only 40 years after the Civil War. So his whole focus during those two trips was giving speeches about the need to reunite the country. And that's what he talked about. And then in 1902, I didn't mention that one. The book is called Good Citizenship, when he went to New England, mostly New England, but also went to the Midwest and Mid-South, like Tennessee. And he got as far as Indianapolis when his leg got really infected, and he basically had to kind of cut it open, and he went back. If most of you know about his role with the coal strike, if you ever watched some of these videos or pictures of it, he's in a wheelchair during those negotiations. That's because of that accident in New England. So that he talked mostly about good citizenship, and that's what I mean about just how to live your life, how to be a good father, how to be a good mother, how to be a good child. He talked about that. And then the last book I wrote was in 1907. He made a trip down the Mississippi River. And again, all these had a vacation purpose too. He ended up doing a 2-week hunting trip in Louisiana when he got down at the end of the river. But the whole point of that trip was he wanted to figure out a way to make the Mississippi River more navigable, for eventually for things like barges and stuff like that. That was his whole purpose. And then what happened was a lot of people kept asking me can I consolidate these all into one book? And that's what this new book, From Sea to Shining Sea, is about. And just so you know what the difference is, it only covers 3 years. because over those 3 years from 1902 to 1905, he hit all 48 states and territories. So that's all I needed. 1907 was more of a river trip. This was about train trips. And then 1911 was kind of a repeat of 1903. So the if you only got to buy one book, that would be the one from Sea to Shining Sea. You'll really get a feel for it. All right. I don't think I have it. We're almost at 40 minutes. I don't want to spend too much time on it. But if you want to know, again, the highlights, if you're only going to buy one book and you didn't want to buy the big one, my favorite book is the first one. Keep It For Your Children. It's just, and then, again, a bit more about how I wrote the book. So I would research newspapers. And again, with the challenge, just the challenge of the book was, these things like newspapers.com, they're really, really good websites. You type in keywords, and all you really have to do is Theodore Roosevelt, May 7th, 1903, and you will get every article written. I mean, it's really well done of the papers that they cover. So I had all that. The difficulty was I insisted on this being an hour by hour account. Okay. And that wasn't easy because of the way newspapers were written back then. So, they have time deadlines. Most of the newspapers, as you probably know, were evening papers. So they had like a 5 or 6 o'clock deadline, and they would just kind of throw it together. And so give you an idea, what would typically happen is the first page one would be talking about what happened late in the day. And then you might have to go throughout the whole newspaper. Well, what happened at 8 a.m., what happened at 2, see what I'm getting, all these types of things. And then you're probably going to have to use multiple papers to get everything. And a lot of those times I was almost ready to give up because I was so frustrated to go, I know he did whatever. He gave the speech between 11 and noon on this day. I can't find it. And it just drove me crazy. And every time I just worked so hard, and eventually I found the article. I never didn't find it. It was a lot of work, so that made me happy because I was just not, you just got to know my personality. I'm not going to leave a gap. It has to be, you have to see everything. You walk next to him, okay, every day for 5 months, and you do everything he did. You listen to what he said. So that was part of the process. Some of the other things are what I used to were letters. There's a lot of the speeches I actually print into the actual speech. I reprint in the books. Letters that he wrote to his kids, a lot came from that. The letters were one of the best things because that's actually him talking, and he's really being honest with his kids. I'll just give a real simple example. Remember how I said he went out to Yellowstone and then he came back to St. Louis and then he went to the Grand Canyon? Well, what he wrote in his letters to his kids, so he had time to write these letters because he's kind of retracing his steps, and basically he said he hated it. He goes, to him it was kind of wasting time. I already made this trip and now I got to go back, dedicate this fair because I promised I would. And then he went out then from then on it was fun. But I thought, no, I just put all that in there. So you really feel like you're with him.
Well, Jim, thank you very much. This is
Welcome.
Wayne Raney. I want to open it up for some questions. We've got some in the chats, but also people can do it verbally. I'll start off. All of us are familiar today with how presidents travel on Air Force One. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about the train that he actually used during his presidency. Was that called Railway One or anything at all like that?
They were all called different things, but there were these really fancy Pullman trains. So he would have a really nice suite. That's where he would do his work. There was the staff had not the same, but the staff had suites on there too. The reporters and stuff like that. And he had a secretary on those trains with him all the time. His personal secretary was with him. But no, they were really, really plush. If you ever been inside a Pullman car, there's a lot of these train museums and you go inside. So he writes about those. So that every one of these trips, he describes the car that he was in, and he describes the preparation for the trips. And so he would get out. So in the back of his car, you've seen this a million times, right? The whistle stop thing. So he would get out at every stop, and he would give some kind of talk, and the crowds were incredible. So giving everywhere he went, the crowds were just incredible. And you got to realize this is not like, again, Donald Trump. This is you want to see the president, this is it. There's no TV, or anything like that. If you hear about him, but if you want to see him, so these people would come from, nearby states and travel a long time to be there. And there'd be, 40 or 50,000 was just common. And so one trip I remember when he was in New Orleans, so he's in the Jackson Square area, you're giving a speech. And what happened was there were so many people that, remember, he had the women and children up front. Well, they were getting crushed, okay, by all the men pushing up. And so he, remember, there's no microphones. So he's constantly yelling at the crowd, if you don't move back, I'm going to end this speech. And that's what he did. He didn't give the speech. And he said, it's too bad, because he told the reporters that was going to be probably the best speech of my whole trip. Yeah. And why did he say that? Because he wanted to get that to get out, for the rest of his trips, people would stop doing that. But anyway, yeah, the Pullman cars were, they're like Air Force One. Obviously, it's a train. The thing about Roosevelt, and one thing about the High Ideals book, the guy was just, God, he was such a caring man. He would, after every trip, that he would, let's say he actually slept on the train at night. He would walk up to the conductor in the front and he would thank him for, making it such a smooth trip. I was able to sleep. That's just, he'd give these speeches, and remember, they're mostly outdoors. And so it was hot. And several times this happened where, someone was faint or passing out, and he would stop the speech and he would go down. He would bring his chair and the water they gave him to that person in the crowd, that elderly person. It's just what he always did. So that's the dual meaning of the High Ideals book. He talked about that, but he lived that. A lot of people don't really know that, but when you read these things, you'll see what I'm talking about. He cared about so many, he just cared about it. That's why he did these trips. They weren't political trips. He just wanted to, you'll see that. He didn't talk about politics stuff. Don't get me wrong. When he's in the Southwest in Arizona, he talked a lot about irrigation, his irrigation bills and stuff like that. But it wasn't, hell, in 1911, he wasn't even president. And he talked about those things. So they weren't trying to get someone elected. And for example, when he went in New England, I found this interesting. When he traveled there, the host was always, like the mayor or the congressman of that city or area. But and that's true, but it didn't matter whether it was a Democrat or Republican, whoever, they were the host. And so everyone loved them, Democrat. And you guys all know that about Roosevelt. Everyone loved the guy. So, next question.
Jim, we have another question here.
Sure.
Are there any interesting stories you can share that emerged from his 1913 hunting trip with his sons up on the North Rim and the Kaibab Plateau? Obviously, there was not a train that would go up there, but he did ride a horse across the Grand Canyon. He was at the South Rim and then took a horse across. And actually, they named it Roosevelt Camp at the bottom of the canyon when he camped there. But the question is, any interesting stories that come to mind from that trip?
No, to me, that's in his book called, what's it called? Happy Hunting Ground? No, something like that. Holidays in the Open. Yeah, it's called Holidays in the Open. So you can, by the way, these books, they're online. These old books, you can just read them. It's called Holidays in the Open. He talks about that trip. To me, the most interesting thing of that whole trip was that he stayed at the El Tovar Hotel. And he talks a lot about on that trip about the amazing view he had, from his suite. It's just kind of funny because he was fighting it. But I didn't finish that story, but he was really, really grateful for the, those guys. It was mostly the train companies that built these things. He was very grateful that they moved it back, voluntarily moved it back. But I thought that was the most interesting thing to me. But it's interesting. You trying to kind of live with him on that hunting trip. But I have read the book, but it wasn't the focus of one of my train things.
Right. So I just want to remind all of our listeners that Jim is making the book available, and you can click on the link in your invitation to tonight's talk, but the pictures are a little bit distorted because of the resizing for the web. But you can send an email to Jim, and he will send you a link, and I have perused the book from sea to shining sea, and I just found it fascinating to see the photographs of the people who turned out for Roosevelt. And I remember reading it that there was a time when a speech couldn't be given and people had traveled a long way, and the disappointment that he had for not being able to see those people because he knew they were coming a long way. So I just want to remind our listeners that through Jim's generosity, you can read the book.
Yeah, so I'll send you the PDF and it's more of a high res.
Yeah. And we've also got a note here that Roosevelt's book, Book Lovers Holidays in the Open.
Yeah, again, you just Google it. You can read it for free online.
Well, there's no other questions, Jim. And I have to say, I just honor your passion for probably one of the greatest Americans who ever lived and who truly was touched by the Grand Canyon. And thank you for sharing your story about Teddy Roosevelt and how he really sort of set the trajectory, not only for Grand Canyon eventually becoming a national park, but really setting up the Antiquities Act of 1906, and which has created so many of our national monuments and parks. Thank you very much, Jim. We really appreciate it, and have a great evening. And we hope you don't get swamped with all the taxes you have to do.
Why'd you have to bring that up? It was good till he said that. It's brutal. See you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
And remember that next month we'll have Eric Bird talking about the Yavapai Observation Station.